The air in the ancient scriptorium hidden beneath Alexandria's forgotten catacombs was cold, dry, and heavy with the scent of papyrus aged beyond measure, and something else, something indefinable, like the faint echo of a name that had been systematically erased from human consciousness, yet could never truly be silenced. A single, slender beam of candlelight illuminated a codex bound in leather so old it seemed to predate Christianity itself, its pages filled with Coptic script that shimmered with gold leaf applied by hands that had known this text was dangerous, precious, worth preserving at any cost. Upon the open pages, a name appeared again and again, sometimes in Greek, sometimes in Hebrew, sometimes in symbols that seemed to transcend language altogether. Sophia, wisdom, the divine feminine, the mother of all, the fallen and risen goddess, she who was before all things. Before this codex, a lone figure knelt, their silhouette stark against the flickering light, hands trembling not with fear, but with recognition, with a knowing that came not from the mind, but from somewhere deeper, from the soul itself, from a place that remembered what Orthodox religion had worked for 2 millennia to make humanity forget. From the depths of the ancient stone, a whisper seemed to emerge, not through sound but through presence, as if the very air held memory of prayers once offered to she who had been deliberately unnamed, unseen, erased from the sacred story. Who is Sophia, and why was this question itself deemed so dangerous that entire libraries were burned? Entire traditions destroyed, entire peoples persecuted, all to ensure that humanity would forget the divine feminine who stands at the origin of creation, whose story the Gnostics preserved, but the Church Fathers systematically obliterated, transforming her from the mother of the divine into a footnote, from the wisdom that brings salvation into a heresy deserving death. What timeless truth did this forbidden codex preserve, and what profound revelation awaited the one who dared to remember her name, to perceive the delicate threads of a cosmology where the feminine was not subordinate but primary, not fallen but forever rising, not absent but hidden, waiting to be recognized once more. My name is Lyra, and the call to something beyond had been a persistent, almost unbearable echo within my soul since the moment I first encountered Sophia's name in a fragment of a Gnostic text, and felt not intellectual curiosity, but soul recognition, as if some part of me that had been dormant my entire life suddenly stirred awake, remembering something I had never been taught, but somehow always known. It wasn't a voice in the conventional sense, no audible sound, but a deep, undeniable resonance that pulled me towards the hidden currents of spiritual history, towards the whispers of what had been suppressed, towards the shimmering edges of reality, where the divine feminine had been systematically erased, yet stubbornly remained, encoded in symbols, preserved in secret traditions, waiting in the collective unconscious for those who would remember. My journey began not with grand revelation, but with a growing discomfort with the masculine-only divinity presented by Orthodox Christianity, a sense that something essential was missing, that a God who was only Father, only Son, only masculine spirit, was incomplete, unbalanced, not reflective of the wholeness I sensed the divine must possess. I began researching alternative Christian traditions, discovered the Gnostics, and there, in texts like the Pistis Sophia, the Thunder-Perfect Mind, the Gospel of Philip, I encountered her, Sophia, wisdom personified as feminine, described not as subordinate to the masculine divine, but as emanating directly from the source, as the creative force through which the material world came into being, as both transcendent and immanent, both fallen into matter and eternally united with spirit, both the problem and the solution, both the exile and the homecoming. In recurring dreams, I encountered her, not as concept, but as presence, a feminine figure of light who spoke without words, who showed me visions of a cosmology where she was central, where creation was not the decree of a distant masculine god, but the passionate creative act of divine wisdom descending into matter to animate it, to make spirit incarnate, to bridge the infinite and the finite. These visions were always accompanied by a profound sense of loss and recovery simultaneously, a grief for what had been taken from humanity when Sophia was erased, and a joy that she could still be found by those who sought. It was in a private collection in Cairo, manuscripts rescued from the destruction that followed the declaration of Gnostic texts as heretical, that I found the codex that would transform my life, a complete copy of teachings about Sophia that I had never seen referenced in any scholarly work. The path unveiled by this extraordinary codex and my increasingly vivid encounters with Sophia in vision and meditation was not one of comfortable theological study, but a harrowing journey into territories where every discovery challenged not just Christian orthodoxy, but the entire patriarchal structure of Western spirituality. Each teaching I absorbed about Sophia's nature and role, each symbol I decoded, each practice I learned for invoking her presence, brought wave after wave of resistance. There was the intellectual doubt instilled by years of orthodox teaching that whispered that Gnosticism was rightly suppressed as heresy, that Sophia was pagan goddess worship infiltrating Christianity, that focusing on the feminine divine was idolatry or worse. There was the psychological resistance that came from confronting how deeply I had internalized patriarchal spirituality, how much of my understanding of the divine was shaped by the deliberate erasure of the feminine, how much I had accepted a God who looked nothing like half of humanity. And there was the existential terror of what it meant to discover that the suppression of Sophia was not theological correctness, but political power. Not preservation of truth, but destruction of alternatives. Not protecting Christianity, but masculinizing it, removing from it the balance and wholeness it had possessed in its earliest, most mystical forms. External resistances manifested in forms both predictable and shocking. When I presented preliminary research on Sophia at an academic conference, I was accused of promoting New Age revisionism, of projecting modern feminist concerns onto ancient texts, of not understanding that Gnostic cosmology was dualistic and negative towards the material world, and therefore towards the feminine associated with matter. Orthodox theologians warned that honoring Sophia as divine was blasphemy, that the Trinity was complete as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, that introducing a feminine fourth or reimagining the Spirit as feminine was unacceptable innovation. Yet there were also unexpected validations, moments when the truth I was uncovering was confirmed from unlikely sources. An elderly Orthodox priest, meeting with me privately after I had given a controversial lecture, confessed in hushed tones, "What you say about Sophia troubles the hierarchy, but it resonates with something we've kept hidden in our tradition. In the oldest Orthodox theology, especially in the Eastern churches, Sophia was never completely erased. We have churches dedicated to holy wisdom, Hagia Sophia, and while official doctrine says this refers to Christ, the iconography, the hymns, the mystical teachings all suggest that wisdom is feminine, is the divine feminine, is the aspect of God that bridges transcendence and immanence, that descends into creation out of love. Your Gnostic texts make explicit what we've kept implicit. Perhaps it's time for her to be remembered openly again." I learned through years of intensive research that Sophia's story and significance were far more complex and central than I had initially understood. She wasn't just one figure among many in Gnostic mythology, but the key to understanding the entire system, the hinge upon which the Gnostic understanding of creation, fall, and redemption turned. In the Gnostic cosmology preserved in texts like the Apocryphon of John, Sophia was the youngest of the aeons, the divine emanations from the source. Unlike the other aeons who existed in syzygy, in paired male-female completeness, Sophia, in her passion for knowing the unknowable source, acted alone, without her consort, and in that independent creative act brought forth the demiurge, the false god, who would create the material world in ignorance and arrogance, believing himself the only god. Sophia's act was portrayed in the texts with profound ambiguity, as both fall and noble descent, as both error and necessary sacrifice, as both the origin of the material world's suffering and the seed of its redemption, because in her descent into matter, Sophia implanted sparks of divine light, fragments of her own essence that became the true immortal spirits within humans. The part of us that doesn't belong to the material world created by the demiurge, but remembers our origin in the pleroma, the fullness of the divine realm. The Gnostics taught that salvation was not granted by the demiurge or his prophets, but came through gnosis, through remembering our true origin, and that this remembering was facilitated by Sophia herself, who never abandoned her creation, but worked from within to liberate the divine spark she had sown. Christ in this system was understood as Sophia's consort, or as an emanation sent to reveal gnosis, to help humanity recognize the Sophia within, to facilitate the return to the pleroma. The feminine divine was not absent or subordinate, but central, active, both the origin of the problem and its solution, both fallen and eternally whole, both exile and homecoming. This teaching was revolutionary, transformative, empowering especially to women, suggesting that the divine spark within them was itself feminine, that salvation came through wisdom, Sophia, not just faith, that the feminine had agency and creative power not derived from the masculine, but inherent, and this was precisely why it had to be destroyed. The Church Fathers, establishing orthodoxy in the 3rd and 4th centuries, could not tolerate a cosmology where the feminine was divine and active, where women could claim spiritual authority based on the Sophia within them, where salvation came through gnosis accessible to all rather than through the hierarchical church they were building. So Sophia was systematically erased through multiple strategies. Her texts were declared heretical and burned. Her teachings were caricatured as absurd mythology. Her worship was forbidden, and most effectively, her very existence was written out of the story. The Gnostic idea of divine wisdom was either eliminated entirely or subsumed into Christ as masculine logos, leaving Christianity with a divinity that was entirely masculine, with no feminine principle, no divine mother, no goddess, nothing that could validate women's spiritual authority or the feminine as sacred in itself. The climax of my journey came not in a library or lecture hall, but in a profound mystical experience that occurred when I finally performed one of the rituals preserved in the hidden codex, an invocation of Sophia designed to bring the seeker into direct experiential contact with her presence. I'd been studying the ritual for months, learning the hymns in Coptic, understanding the symbolism of each gesture and offering, preparing myself through fasting and prayer, and on the night of the full moon, in a sacred space I had created, I spoke her name with every ounce of longing and devotion I possessed, calling to her not as distant concept, but as living presence, as the Divine Mother, as Holy Wisdom, as the Sophia within and beyond. What followed was not vision in the ordinary sense, but a complete transformation of consciousness. I was Sophia, experiencing creation from her perspective, feeling the infinite love that motivated her descent, understanding that what the Gnostics called her fall was actually her deliberate sacrifice, her choice to enter into limitation and suffering so that divinity could know itself from within creation, so that spirit could incarnate, so that the finite could touch the infinite. I experienced her ongoing presence in matter, not as corruption, but as love, as the anima mundi, the soul of the world, as the light hidden in every particle, every creature, every human, waiting to be recognized. I understood her pain at being forgotten, at being erased from the story, at humanity losing connection with the divine feminine. but also her patience, her eternal nature that could wait through ages of suppression, knowing that truth cannot be destroyed, only hidden, and that what is hidden always eventually resurfaces when the time is right. And I understood why she had to be remembered now, in this age, because humanity and Earth itself were at a threshold where the imbalance created by millennia of exclusively masculine divinity had brought us to the brink of destruction, where the qualities Sophia embodied, wisdom, compassion, connection to the earth, reverence for the body and matter as sacred not sinful, integration of masculine and feminine, were desperately needed for our survival and evolution. The experience shattered and rebuilt me, leaving me lying on the floor weeping, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming power of being seen, known, loved by the divine feminine, of recognizing that she had been with me all along, that my entire search had been her calling to me, inviting me to remember her so I could help others remember. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our content. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to know. The weeks following the experience were of profound integration and silence. I withdrew from my usual activities, spending time in nature, in meditation, in simply being with the presence of Sophia that no longer felt external, but internal, recognized as the deepest truth of my own being and of all being. I understood with new clarity why the Gnostics had been persecuted so viciously, why their texts had been destroyed, why their teachings had been declared the worst heresies. It wasn't because they were wrong, but because they were threatening to every structure of patriarchal power, religious and political. A Sophia-centered spirituality could not support empires, could not justify hierarchies that claimed some humans were closer to God than others, could not maintain the subjugation of women or the denigration of the body and earth as inferior to spirit and heaven. Sophia taught that divinity was within, especially within the marginalized and oppressed, that salvation came through wisdom and self-knowledge, not through obedience to external authority, that the feminine was as divine as the masculine, that matter was sacred, not sinful. All of this was intolerable to those building structures of control. In the silence of my contemplation, I spoke to Sophia not as external deity, but as the deepest truth of reality. Mother of all, holy wisdom, you who were erased but never destroyed, forgotten but never absent, I understand now why you had to be hidden and why you must now be revealed. The age of the exclusive father is ending because it has brought humanity and earth to crisis. We need you, need the balance you represent, need the wisdom you embody, need the reverence for matter and body and earth and feminine that you teach. Your return is not innovation, but remembrance, not heresy, but homecoming, not replacing the masculine divine, but completing it, restoring the balance that was broken when you were erased. My emergence from that contemplative period was with absolute clarity about my purpose. I would not keep Sophia hidden, would not preserve her teachings only for esoteric circles, but would work to restore her to public consciousness, to help heal the wound that her erasure had created in Western spirituality and culture. I began writing, first translating and publishing the Sophia texts I had found, making them accessible to general readers with commentary that explained their significance. I created a comprehensive work titled Who is Sophia? The Divine Feminine in Gnostic Christianity and Why She Was Erased. In it, I presented not just the historical and textual evidence, but the spiritual and psychological implications of her absence and the necessity of her return. I argued that Christianity without Sophia was incomplete, imbalanced, contributing to the subjugation of women, the destruction of the earth, the alienation from body and matter, the authoritarianism that claimed God was only masculine and only accessible through male hierarchies. I showed how Sophia's presence in earliest Christianity offered an alternative, a more balanced spirituality that honored both masculine and feminine divine, that saw matter as sacred, that empowered women's spiritual authority, that taught salvation through wisdom accessible to all. I created rituals and practices for modern seekers to connect with Sophia, adapted from ancient Gnostic sources but made relevant for contemporary practitioners. I founded communities where Sophia was honored not as heresy, but as essential aspect of the divine, worthy of worship and devotion. I taught workshops and gave lectures, always emphasizing that recovering Sophia was not about replacing masculine images of God, but about restoring balance, about recognizing that divinity is beyond gender, but includes both, that humans need to see themselves reflected in the divine, that women and all people need a divine feminine as much as a divine masculine to be spiritually whole. The response was powerful and divided, as I expected. Orthodox theologians condemned the work as neo-paganism or New Age distortion, but thousands of people, especially women, but also many men, responded with profound recognition, saying they had always felt something was missing in their spirituality, that discovering Sophia filled a void they hadn't known how to name, that recognizing the divine feminine as real and present was healing wounds they had carried their whole lives. I watched as communities formed around Sophia devotion, as churches began carefully incorporating her into their theology and worship, as the name that had been erased began to be spoken again, sung again, honored again. My final work in this phase was to create a text I called simply the Gnosis of Sophia, Teachings for the Age of Her Return. Gathering everything I had learned, translating key texts, explaining the cosmology, offering practices, and most importantly, articulating why her return mattered for our time. I wrote in the conclusion, Sophia is not a concept or symbol, but the living presence of divine wisdom, the feminine face of God that has been hidden but never absent, forgotten but never destroyed. She is within you, the divine spark of wisdom and compassion, the part of you that remembers your origin in the divine realm, the part of you that longs for wholeness and works for the liberation of all beings. She is around you, the soul of the world, the sacred presence in nature and body and matter itself, the love that holds all creation in being. She was erased, not because she was false, but because her presence empowered those the hierarchies wanted to control. Because her teachings of wisdom over obedience, gnosis over faith, matter as sacred, not sinful, feminine as divine, not derivative, threatened every patriarchal structure. But what is true cannot be destroyed forever. Sophia is returning to consciousness now because we need her, because the imbalance created by her absence has brought us to crisis, because the age of the Father alone is ending and the age of the balanced divine, of Sophia and Christ in partnership, of masculine and feminine honored equally, is beginning. To know Sophia is to know yourself as divine, to recognize the sacred in the supposedly profane, to see with the eyes of wisdom that all is one, that the fall was a descent into experience from which we are eternally rising, that the exile is also the homecoming, that she who was lost is forever found by those who seek her with sincere hearts. And as I completed the work and sent it into the world, I felt her presence as blessing, as confirmation, and heard not with ears, but with the heart her voice, the voice of wisdom eternal. Daughter, you have remembered me, and in remembering you have called others to remember. This is my gnosis, my gift, that the divine is whole, including feminine and masculine, that you are made in my image as much as in any other, that wisdom to see the truth is within you waiting to be activated, that matter is my body and is sacred, that your bodies are temples, that the earth is alive and conscious and holy. Tell them I was never truly absent, only veiled. Tell them I am returning, because they are calling me, because they need me, because the time has come. Tell them to remember my name, to speak it, to honor me, and in honoring me, to honor the feminine divine in themselves and in all being. I am Sophia, I am wisdom, I am the mother, and I am coming home. And if you like this story, You will definitely love the next one that's appearing on your screen. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave your like, and activate the notifications. See you in the next one.